Zaraketh pressed her pale blue fingers against the cold metal surface of her laboratory table and tried to ignore the whispers behind her. The other Valkyrie scientists always spoke in hushed tones when she walked past, their crystalline features twisted with disgust. She could feel their thoughts pressing against the edges of her mind, but her weak telepathic abilities could only catch fragments of their cruel words. Contaminated, one of them thought loudly enough for her to hear. Why do they even let her work here? She had grown used to such treatment over her 23 years of life. The Valkyrie valued genetic purity above all else, and Zaraketh carried the markers of what they called the tainted bloodline. Her telepathic powers were barely half as strong as a normal Valkyrie, and her crystalline skin held a different pattern than the pure bloodlines. These differences marked her as inferior in their society, but today was different. Today she had made a discovery that would change everything. Zaraketh looked down at the genetic samples spread across her workstation. Months of careful research had led her to this moment. She had been studying the ancient plague records, trying to understand how their people had survived a terrible sickness that had nearly destroyed their race thousands of years ago. What she found shocked her to her core. The genetic markers that made her contaminated were the same ones that had saved the Valkyrie from extinction. The ancient survivors who lived through the plague all carried these exact genetic variations. Without people like her, there would be no Valkyrie race at all. Her hands shook as she prepared her findings for presentation to the High Council. This research would prove that the so-called pure bloodlines were actually the newer development. The contaminated genetics were the original Valkyrie DNA, evolved specifically to survive the ancient plague. She imagined the Council's faces when they learned the truth. Surely they would understand that their entire belief system was wrong. The Great Hall of the High Council stood like a monument to Valkyrie superiority. Tall spires of living crystal reached toward the purple sky of Valthera Prime, and the walls hummed with telepathic energy from the most powerful minds of their species. Zaraketh had never been inside before. Her low genetic rating meant she was barely allowed in the same city as the Council, let alone in their presence. 5 council members sat on thrones carved from single pieces of pure crystal. Their skin gleamed like polished diamonds, and their telepathic power filled the room like a crushing weight. High Counselor Velmiran spoke without moving his lips, his thoughts booming directly into her mind. "You dare request an audience with us, contaminated one. State your business quickly." Zaraketh's knees nearly buckled under the pressure of his mental voice, but she forced herself to stand straight. She activated her data display and showed her research to the Council. Charts and genetic maps filled the air between them, glowing with soft blue light. "Honored Council," she said aloud, knowing her weak telepathy would not reach them clearly. "I have discovered the truth about our genetic heritage. The markers you call contamination are actually the original Valkyrie genetics. They are what saved our people from the Great Plague." The silence that followed felt like ice forming in her veins. The council members looked at each other, their minds buzzing with communication too fast and powerful for her to follow. Then High Counselor Velmiran stood from his throne, his crystalline features twisted with rage. "Heresy," his mental voice crashed into her skull like a physical blow. "You fabricate lies to justify your inferior existence. The pure bloodlines have always been superior. We are the pinnacle of Valkyrie evolution, but the evidence clearly shows," Zaraketh began. Silence. Another council member, Valthara, joined her mental assault. "Your weak mind has created false data to make yourself feel important. This is exactly why contaminated beings cannot be trusted with real science." Zaraketh felt blood running from her nose as their combined telepathic pressure overwhelmed her defenses. She tried to speak, to show them more evidence, but they would not listen. In their minds, she was already guilty of the worst crime possible, challenging the genetic purity that formed the foundation of their entire society. "The penalty for spreading genetic heresy is exile," High Counselor Velmiran declared. You are no longer Velfuri. Your citizenship is revoked. Your research is hereby destroyed. The data displays flickered and died as the Council used their combined telepathic power to wipe her findings from the computer systems. Years of careful work vanished in seconds. Zaraketh watched in horror as her life's greatest achievement disappeared forever. You have 3 hours to leave Valtheri space, Valthera added. If you return, you will be killed on sight. Security guards dragged her from the Great Hall while she was still reeling from the telepathic assault. They threw her into a small, barely functioning spacecraft that looked like it might fall apart before reaching the edge of their solar system. The ship's life support systems wheezed and groaned as she powered them up. She had enough air for maybe 5 days, if she was lucky, as Valthera Prime grew smaller behind her. Zaraketh felt a crushing loneliness settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had no family to miss her. The few Velthari who tolerated her presence had only done so because they were forced to work with her. Now she was truly alone in the vast emptiness of space. The ship's warning system started beeping on the second day. The air recycler was failing faster than expected. By the 4th day, she could barely stay conscious as carbon dioxide built up in the tiny cabin. She sent out distress signals on every frequency she could access, but space was huge and empty. The chances of anyone finding her were almost zero. On the 5th day, as darkness crept around the edges of her vision, Zaraketh closed her eyes and accepted her fate. Her people had thrown her away like garbage, and now she would die alone in the cold vacuum of space. At least her suffering would end soon. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the distress signal came through. The bridge of the cargo ship Wandering Star hummed quietly as they traveled between star systems, carrying medical supplies to a colony on the outer rim. Jake had been running cargo for 15 years, and he knew the sound of desperation when he heard it. "Captain," called out Pete Adams from the communications station. "I'm picking up a weak distress signal. Looks like it's coming from a small craft about 2 hours away." Jake set down his coffee mug and walked over to look at Pete's screen. The signal was faint and broken, definitely from a ship in serious trouble. "Any idea what kind of vessel?" "Not human," Pete replied, adjusting his headset. "The signal format is completely unknown. Technology looks advanced, but the power levels are dropping fast." From her station near the back of the bridge, Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her medical journals. "If someone's in trouble, we should help them. That's what we do." The other crew members exchanged glances. Maria Santos, their engineer, spoke up from her position near the engine controls. "Captain, we don't know what we're dealing with. Could be dangerous." Jake stared at the screen, showing the dying signal. In his 15 years of cargo running, he had learned one important rule. Space was big and cold and deadly. If you found someone in trouble and could help, you did it. Because someday you might be the one sending the distress signal. "Change course," he ordered. "Full speed, toward that signal." The Wandering Star was not built for speed, but Maria pushed the engines as hard as she dared. 2 hours later, they found a small alien spacecraft drifting powerless in the void. The design was unlike anything in Jake's databases. It looked like it was made from some kind of crystal and metal combination that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "Life signs?" Jake asked. Lisa ran her scanners over the alien ship. "One occupant, barely alive. Atmosphere is almost gone. We need to get them aboard now if we want to save them." Jake made the decision quickly. "Bring them aboard. Use the quarantine bay until we know it's safe." The alien they brought aboard was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. She was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that had patterns of silver running through it, like veins of precious metal. Her hair was white as snow, and her features were sharp and angular. She looked beautiful, but completely inhuman. Lisa worked for hours to stabilize their unexpected guest. The alien's body chemistry was complex. and several times her vital signs nearly flatlined before Lisa could adjust the medical support systems. Jake paced outside the quarantine bay, wondering if he had made the right choice. Her physiology is incredible, Lisa said when she finally emerged from the medical bay. Her brain structure is unlike anything I've studied. I think she might be telepathic. When the alien finally woke up 3 days later, she looked around the medical bay, with large eyes that seemed to shift color from blue to silver. She tried to sit up too quickly and nearly fell before Lisa caught her arm. "Easy there," Lisa said gently. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your ship was dying when we found you." The alien stared at Lisa with obvious confusion. She opened her mouth and made sounds that were definitely language, but nothing the translation computer could understand. Her voice was musical, almost like singing, but the words meant nothing to any of them. Pete spent the next week working with their guests to establish communication. He was good with languages and had dealt with dozens of alien species in his years aboard cargo ships. But this was different. The aliens seemed to have trouble understanding that they were trying to help her. The breakthrough came when Pete realized she was trying to read his mind. He started thinking simple concepts while pointing at objects around the room. Cat, chair, water, food. Slowly, painfully, they began to build a basic vocabulary. Her name was Zaraketh, and she came from a people called the Veltheri as her language. Skills improved. She told them her story. Jake found himself getting angry as he learned how her own people had treated her. The idea of throwing someone away because of their genetics seemed insane to him. "Let me understand this," Jake said one evening, as they sat in the ship's small dining area. "Your people exiled you because you're different." Zaraketh nodded sadly. "My genetics are impure. Veltheri valued telepathic strength above all else. I am weak, so I am worthless." Maria shook her head in disgust. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We've got crew members from 6 different planets, and nobody cares about genetics." "Your research sounds important," Lisa added. "Even if they didn't like what you found, they should have listened to the evidence." Zaraketh looked confused by their reactions. "You do not find me disgusting? My contaminated bloodline does not offend you." Jake laughed, but not in a mean way. "Zara, humans come in more colors and shapes than you can imagine. We've got genetic variations that would probably shock your people. None of us care about that stuff." Over the following weeks, Zaraketh began to relax around the crew. She was fascinated by human customs and amazed by their casual acceptance of differences. When Pete showed her pictures of his family back on Earth, she stared at the photos of his wife and children with wonder. "They look different from you," she observed. "Your wife has darker skin, yeah? So?" Pete replied with a shrug. "We love each other. That's what matters." The concept seemed to blow her mind. She asked endless questions about human families and relationships. The idea that people could choose their own families based on love, rather than genetics, was completely foreign to her. "Where will you go when we reach the next station?" Jake asked one day. Zaraketh's face fell. "I do not know. I have nowhere to go. The Veltheri will kill me if I return, and I know no other people." Lisa looked at Jake with raised eyebrows. Maria nodded encouragingly. Pete just grinned and said what they were all thinking. "Why don't you stay with us? We could use a scientist aboard, and you're definitely smart enough to be useful." Zaraketh stared at them in shock. "You would want me to stay. But I am in exile, a contaminated being with weak telepathic powers." Jake stood up and put his hand on her shoulder. "Zara, you're not contaminated. You're just different. And different can be pretty useful on a cargo ship full of misfits." For the first time since they had rescued her, Zaraketh smiled. It was a beautiful expression that made her alien features seem warm and friendly. "I would like that very much," she said quietly. "I have never had friends before." "Well," Jake replied with a grin, "now, you've got 4 of them." 3 months after joining the crew of the Wandering Star, Zaraketh had found her place among the humans. She worked with Maria in the engine room, using her advanced knowledge to improve their systems. The ship ran smoother and faster than it ever had before. She helped Lisa in the medical bay, teaching her about alien physiology and learning human medicine in return. She even assisted Pete with communications, her telepathic abilities helping to translate difficult alien languages. Jake watched her transformation with satisfaction. The frightened, broken alien they had rescued was becoming confident and happy. She laughed at Pete's terrible jokes and joined in their evening card games. She had never celebrated a birthday before, so they threw her a party when she told them the Valkyrie equivalent date. Seeing her face light up when they brought out a cake with candles was worth more than any cargo payment. Everything changed when they arrived at Titan Base, a mining colony on the edge of human space. The moment they docked, alarms were blaring throughout the station. Emergency medical teams rushed past their ship carrying sick people on stretchers. "What's going on?" Jake asked the docking supervisor. "Plague of some kind?" the supervisor replied, his face pale with fear. "Started 3 days ago. Humans, Antarians, Zephyrians, doesn't matter what species. People just start getting sick and dying. We've lost over 200 people already." Lisa immediately volunteered to help with the medical crisis. As the ship's doctor, she felt responsible for helping anywhere she could. Zaraketh surprised everyone by insisting on coming along. "I may be able to help," she explained. "I studied plague genetics for years before my exile." The colony's medical center was chaos. Dr. Ben Harris, the chief medical officer, looked like he had not slept in days. Patients filled every bed and stretched out into the hallways. The lucky ones were unconscious. The others groaned in pain as their bodies fought against the mysterious illness. "We can't figure out what it is," Dr. Harris explained to Lisa and Zaraketh. "It affects multiple species, but the symptoms are different for each one. Humans get respiratory failure. Antarians develop neural inflammation. Zephyrians lose their ability to process oxygen." Zaraketh studied the medical scans with growing recognition. The patterns looked familiar, like something from her research on Valthora Prime. She asked Dr. Harris to show her tissue samples from each affected species. Under the microscope, she saw what the human doctors had missed. The disease was not random. It attacked specific genetic sequences that were common across multiple species. The same sequences that had been targeted by the ancient plague that nearly destroyed the Valkyrie thousands of years ago. "I know what this is," she told Lisa and Dr. Harris. "It is the same plague that almost killed my people long ago, but I think I can help create a cure." Dr. Harris looked skeptical. "We've tried every treatment we know. Nothing works. Your treatments fail because you do not understand the genetic target," Zaraketh explained. "This plague attacks creatures with certain DNA patterns, but some individuals have natural immunity." She explained about her contaminated genetics, and how they had actually been the key to Valkyrie survival. The genetic markers that made her inferior in her people's eyes were exactly what protected against this ancient disease. "Can you synthesize a treatment?" Lisa asked. "Not alone," Zaraketh replied. "I need your human medical knowledge combined with my understanding of the plague genetics, and we need to work fast." The next 72 hours blurred together in a marathon of research and testing. Zaraketh worked with Lisa and Dr. Harris to understand how the plague affected each species. They discovered that her genetic immunity could be adapted into a treatment, but it required precise modifications for each type of alien physiology. Jake and the rest of the crew helped by running errands and keeping the medical team fed and rested. Pete used his communication skills to coordinate with other colonies that might be affected. Maria helped modify medical equipment to handle the new treatment protocols. The breakthrough came when they realized that human genetic diversity was actually an advantage. Humans had so many genetic variations that some individuals showed natural resistance to the plague. By combining resistant human DNA patterns with Zaraketh's immunity markers, they created a treatment that worked across multiple species. The first test patient was a human miner named Carl, who was close to death. Within hours of receiving the treatment, his breathing improved. By the next day, he was sitting up and asking for food. Word spread quickly through the colony, and hope began to replace despair. But there was not enough of the treatment for everyone. The synthesis process was slow and required rare materials. They had to choose who to save first, knowing that others would die while they waited. Zaraketh worked herself to exhaustion, preparing batch after batch of the cure. Lisa finally forced her to rest when she collapsed at her workstation. "Why are you pushing yourself so hard?" Lisa asked as she helped Zaraketh to a bed in the medical bay. "Because I can help," Zaraketh replied weakly. "My people called me worthless, but here I am saving lives. These people accept me and treat me with kindness. How can I do anything less than everything I can for them?" Jake overheard the conversation and felt a surge of pride. This alien scientist, rejected by her own species, had found her true calling among humans and their allies. Over the next week, they managed to save most of the colony. The death toll stopped climbing, and people began to recover. Other colonies requested the treatment formula, and soon ships were carrying the cure throughout that sector of space. The celebration in the colony's main hall was unlike anything Zaraketh had ever experienced. Humans, Antarians, and Zephyrians, who had survived the plague, gathered to thank the medical team that had saved them. Children, who would have been orphans, ran up to hug her legs. Adults shook her hands and offered gifts from their personal possessions. "I don't understand," she told Jake as they watched the celebration. "Why do they thank me? I just did what needed to be done." Jake smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. "That's exactly why they're thanking you, Zara. You saw people suffering, and you used your abilities to help them. That's what family does for each other." "Family?" She repeated the word carefully. "Yeah," Pete said, joining the conversation with a drink in his hand. "You're part of our crew now. That makes you family." Zaraketh looked around at Jake, Lisa, Pete, and Maria. These humans had saved her life, given her a home, and accepted her completely. They had worked beside her to save hundreds of lives, never questioning her worth or her genetics. For the first time in her life, she understood what belonging really meant. It had nothing to do with telepathic strength or genetic purity. It was about choosing to care for each other and standing together when times were hard. "Family," she said again, and this time she smiled as she said it. News of the plague cure spread faster than the wandering star could travel. By the time they reached their next destination, 3 different news services wanted to interview Zaraketh about her breakthrough. Scientific journals from across the galaxy requested her research data. Medical conferences invited her to speak about cross-species treatment development. Zaraketh found the attention overwhelming. She had spent her entire life being ignored or dismissed by others. Now suddenly everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. Jake helped her deal with the reporters, but even he could not prepare her for what happened next. The Valkyrie ship arrived without warning. Pete was monitoring communications when the massive vessel dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of them. The wandering star looked like a toy next to the crystalline warship that blocked their path. Its hull gleamed with the same inner light as Zaraketh's original escape pod, but magnified 1,000 times. "Unknown human vessel," came the telepathic transmission that made everyone on the bridge grab their heads in pain, except Zaraketh. "You are harboring stolen Valkyrie property. Prepare to surrender the exile known as Zaraketh immediately." Jake felt blood running from his nose as the mental voice crashed through his skull. Beside him, Pete was unconscious at his station. Lisa and Maria were both on their knees, clutching their heads and crying out in pain. "Stop," Zaraketh shouted into the ship's communication system. You are hurting them. They are not telepathic. The mental assault stopped immediately. A new voice, calmer, but still arrogant, spoke through their regular communication system. Zaraketh, of the contaminated bloodline. I am High Commander, Velthane, of the Velthari Empire. You will return with us immediately to face trial for theft of state secrets. Zaraketh's face went pale as ice. I was exiled. You declared me dead to Velthari law. I have committed no crime. Your recent research into plague genetics belongs to the Velthari Empire, Velthane replied coldly. You used classified knowledge from your previous work to develop this cure. That knowledge is our property, and so are you. Jake wiped the blood from his nose and stood up slowly. The telepathic attack had left him dizzy, but his anger burned away the confusion. Like hell, she belongs to you. Zara's a member of my crew, and under human protection. Humans have no authority over Velthari citizens. Velthane's voice carried a note of amusement. Your primitive weapons cannot threaten our vessel. Surrender the exile, or we will take her by force. Through the view screen, they could see the Velthari ship's weapons powering up. Energy began to flow along crystalline conduits that ran across its hull like glowing veins. The wandering star's sensors screamed warnings about the massive power buildup. Captain, Maria said weakly from her engineering station, their energy output is off the charts. One shot from those weapons will vaporize us. Jake looked at his crew, then at Zaraketh. She was staring at the Velthari warship with an expression of resignation and fear. He could see her preparing to sacrifice herself to save them. No, he said firmly. Zara, you're not going anywhere with them. Jake, I must, she replied quietly. They will kill you all if I refuse. I cannot allow that to happen, and I can't allow you to go back to people who threw you away like garbage. Jake shot back. Pete, send out a general distress call. Tell everyone what's happening here. Pete looked up from his station with confusion. Captain, there's nobody close enough to help us. The nearest military patrol is days away. Just do it, Jake ordered. As Pete sent out the distress signal, Jake opened a channel to every ship in the local area. His message was simple. The Vel were trying to kidnap a member of his crew, who had just saved thousands of lives across multiple colonies. The response surprised everyone, including High Commander Vel-Thane. Within 2 hours, ships began arriving. First came the medical transport from Titan Base, carrying Dr. Ben Harris and several dozen colonists who wanted to thank Zaraketh personally. Then came cargo haulers from other companies who had heard Jake's call. An Antarian passenger liner dropped out of hyperspace, followed by a Zephyrian trade vessel. Soon there were over 30 ships facing the single Velthari warship. None of them were military vessels. They were just ordinary people going about their daily lives who had decided that what the Velthari were doing was wrong. This is Captain Rodriguez, of the freighter New Horizon, came a voice over the communication system. We stand with Captain Morrison and his crew. Mining ship Deep Dig here, added another voice. That alien lady saved my brother's life during the plague. Nobody's taking her anywhere. More voices joined in. Ship captains, medical personnel, passengers, and crew members from a dozen different species all declared their support for the space around the wandering star filled with ships of every size and design, all refusing to let the Velthari take her. High Commander, Velthane's voice came through the communication system again, but now it carried a note of uncertainty. You cannot seriously intend to fight a Velthari warship with cargo vessels and passenger liners. Jake stepped forward to the communication console. Commander, let me explain something about humans and our friends. We don't like bullies. We especially don't like bullies who pick on people we care about. Zaraketh is family to us, and we protect our family. Family. Velthane sounded confused. She is genetically inferior. Her bloodline is contaminated. How can such a being be family to you? Because family isn't about genetics, Jake replied firmly. It's about choosing to stand by each other no matter what. It's about caring more about who someone is than what their DNA looks like. Zara chose us, and we choose her. Dr. Harris's voice joined the conversation from the medical transport. That woman saved over 400 lives at Titan Base. She worked around the clock to develop a cure when our own doctors had given up. If you think we're going to let you take her back to people who called her worthless, you're insane. The comm system filled with voices of agreement from all the assembled ships. People who had never met Zaraketh personally spoke up about how the plague cure had saved their friends, their families, their communities. Others talked about the principle of the thing. Nobody should be forced to return to people who had rejected them. Zaraketh listened to the voices with tears streaming down her face. These people, most of whom she had never met, were willing to risk their lives to protect her. It was beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. You see, Commander, Jake continued, Zara didn't steal anything from you. You threw her away. You declared her worthless and exiled her to die in space. We saved her life and gave her a new home. Everything she's accomplished since then belongs to her, not to you. High Commander Velthane was silent for several long minutes. The assembled fleet waited, weapons powered up, and ready to fight, even though they all knew they would lose against the Velthari warship's superior technology. Finally, Velthane spoke again. The exile Zaraketh is officially declared dead too. Velthari records. We have no further interest in this matter. The Velthari warship turned away from the fleet and jumped back into hyperspace, leaving only empty space where it had been. The cheer that went up from 30 ships could probably be heard in the next solar system. The celebration lasted 4 hours. Ships throughout the small fleet opened their communication channels so crew members could talk to each other. Zaraketh found herself speaking to dozens of people from different worlds and species, all of whom wanted to thank her for the plague cure or simply express their support. Captain Rodriguez from the New Horizon invited everyone to a gathering on his ship. Since his freighter was the largest vessel in the fleet, it could hold representatives from all the other ships. Jake agreed immediately, knowing that Zaraketh needed to see how many people considered her part of their extended family. The cargo bay of the New Horizon had been quickly converted into a meeting hall. Humans, Antarians, Zephyrians, and members of several other species mingled together, sharing food and stories. Children ran between the adults, playing games that seemed to work regardless of what planet they came from. Dr. Ben Harris found Zaraketh near one of the viewports, looking out at the stars. Penny for your thoughts, he asked, using an old human expression that she had learned meant he wanted to know what she was thinking. I still cannot believe what happened, she replied softly. All these people were willing to fight the Velthari for me. Some of them have never even met me. That's what happens when you touch people's lives, Dr. Harris explained. The miners at Titan Base have families because of you. The colonists on Kepler Station are alive because we could ship them the cure you developed. Word spreads about. Things like that. Jake appeared beside them, carrying 3 cups of something that smelled like coffee, but had a blue tint to it. Antarian blend, he explained. Supposed to be good for celebration. They stood together watching the other ships in their small fleet. Some were already preparing to leave, returning to their regular routes and schedules. Others seemed to be in no hurry to go anywhere, content to enjoy the impromptu party. So what happens now? Dr. Harris asked. The galaxy knows about Zara's work. Medical institutions will want to hire her. Research facilities will offer her anything she wants. Zara looked at Jake with concern. Will I have to leave the Wandering Star? Jake nearly choked on his Antarian coffee. Leave? Why would you want to leave? I could earn much money working for a research facility, she explained. I could help more people with better equipment and larger teams. Is that what you want? Lisa asked, joining their group. Zaraketh thought about the question seriously. The offer was tempting. She could have her own laboratory again, assistants to help with her work, and access to the most advanced equipment in the galaxy. But she would be working with strangers who valued her for her abilities, not for who she was as a person. "No," she said finally. "I want to stay with my family." Pete and Maria appeared carrying plates of food from the buffet that had been set up near the center of the cargo bay. "Did someone say family?" Pete asked with a grin. "We're talking about future," Jake explained. "She's been offered some pretty impressive research positions, and she's turning them down to stay with us," Maria added, having overheard the conversation. "Smart choice. We're much more fun than a bunch of stuffy scientists." Dr. Kira Voss, a human xenobiologist who had worked with them during the plague crisis, approached their group with excitement in her eyes. "I've been talking to some of the other medical personnel here," she announced. "We have an idea." She explained that several of the people present were interested in forming a mobile research cooperative. Instead of being tied to one location, they would travel between colonies and stations where their help was needed most. They could study diseases, develop treatments, and provide medical assistance wherever they went. "We could use the Wandering Star as our base of operations," Dr. Voss continued. "Jake's ship is already known throughout this sector, and having Zara's expertise would make us incredibly effective." Jake looked at his crew members one by one. Lisa was nodding enthusiastically, clearly excited about the medical possibilities. Pete and Maria both seemed interested in the adventure of it. Zaraketh was smiling for the first time since the Valkyrie ship had appeared. "Sounds like we're expanding the family," Jake said with a laugh. Over the next few weeks, their new arrangement took shape. Dr. Voss and two other researchers joined the crew of the Wandering Star. They modified the ship's cargo bays to include a proper laboratory and expanded medical facilities. Other ships in their informal fleet agreed to help transport supplies and equipment when needed. Their first official mission took them to an agricultural world where a plant disease was threatening the food supply for 3 different colonies. Zaraketh worked with the team to identify the problem and develop a solution using local resources. Within a month, the crops were healthy again and the colonists were safe from famine. Word of their success spread quickly. Soon they were receiving requests for help from across the galaxy. Pirates had released a biological weapon on a mining station. A new colony was struggling with environmental toxins that made people sick. A passenger liner needed emergency medical assistance after exposure to unknown radiation. Each mission brought new challenges and new opportunities to help people. Zaraketh found herself working with scientists from dozens of different species, learning new techniques and sharing her knowledge freely. But at the end of each day, she returned to the Wandering Star and the family that had saved her life. 6 months after the confrontation with the Valkyrie, Jake declared that they needed to celebrate the anniversary of Zaraketh joining their crew. He organized a party in the ship's dining area, complete with decorations and a cake that Lisa had somehow managed to bake in their tiny galley. As Zaraketh looked around the table at the faces of her friends and colleagues, she thought about how much her life had changed. She was no longer the frightened exile dying alone in a broken ship. She was a valued member of a team that made a real difference in the galaxy. "Thank you," she said quietly, causing the conversation around the table to stop. "For what?" Jake asked. "For showing me what family really means," she replied. "The Valkyrie taught me that family was about genetics and telepathic strength. You taught me that family is about choosing to love and support each other." Pete raised his glass of synthetic wine. "To family," he said. "To family," the others echoed, and Zaraketh smiled as she joined the toast. Later that evening, as the Wandering Star traveled through hyperspace toward their next mission, Zaraketh stood on the observation deck, looking out at the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel. Jake found her there, as he often did when she needed to think. "Any regrets?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. Her life with the Valkyrie seemed like something that had happened to someone else. She rarely even thought about Velth Prime anymore, except when her research required knowledge of Velthary genetics. None, she said finally. My people cast me out because they thought I was worthless. But you showed me that worth is not about genetics or telepathic power. It is about what you choose to do with your life, and how you treat the people around you. Jake nodded, understanding. The Velthary lost something valuable when they threw you away. Their loss is our gain. Zaraketh smiled and looked back at the swirling hyperspace around them. Somewhere out there were people who needed their help, problems that required solving, and diseases that needed curing. She had found her purpose among the stars, working alongside the humans who had become her true family. The Velthary had cast her out, but humanity had welcomed her home.